Why is it that some students have all the questions and some of them can't seem to even think about one question? It's true across life, really. Think about it. There are people who ask tons of questions in your college classes, in teacher meetings, at conferences. They are unafraid of looking stupid or being the only one who doesn't seem to understand, but they aren't. They're just the brave ones asking the questions that most everyone else has as well. They're also the ones who take what they've learned and apply it effectively, faster than almost anyone else. They don't fumble around with it so much because they already have clarity and the information is remembered. Now, obviously, today's episode is all about asking questions. So let's dive in. Today's episode is sponsored by everyteachereveryday.org. Teachers, I know you're juggling a lot of plates this year. Every Teacher Every Day wants to make the juggling smoother for teachers with its new website available at zero cost. With a searchable database of free lesson plans and resources, Every Teacher Every Day provides a diverse community of wise and witty educators to engage with. I love the idea behind this website. It's easy to use and effective, and it's my favorite teacher price, free. You can join the community now by going to everyteachereveryday.org/teachjoyfully. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. And this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. As Albert Einstein once said, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. Wise words indeed. So let's start today with the benefits of being able to ask questions. There are so many benefits to being able to ask great questions. Asking great questions makes students more aware of their thinking and gives control over their thinking. It helps with memory and retention of knowledge. It gives them the ability to apply their knowledge, to transfer it from one thing to another and use it in meaningful ways. It also gives students a deeper understanding of the knowledge, which really is essential in being able to apply it. Asking great questions requires students to employ and grow their critical thinking skills. This just takes time, and they have to practice questioning strategies in order to be able to build these kind of skills. And did you know that asking great questions helps students make better decisions? It can. If you can ask good questions, then you can filter information better and then make better decisions based on what you know. Great questioning helps students build connection with others. It builds a rapport between them. If you can ask questions of other people, then you get to know them better. So questioning strategies also apply in all of our relationships, whether they're personal, school, or business relationships. Asking great questions is still important. And the more questions we ask, the more curious we are. Asking great questions can become an entire mindset and a way of being thoughtful and introspective. And in addition, when students can ask great questions, they can engage in the learning on a different level. They can get better answers, they will give you a better work and a better product in the end of anything that you're asking them to do with that information. So now that we know the benefits and we know why we need to teach students to ask great questions, how do we ask great questions? Well, asking questions is not always easy as we think it is. It's not intuitive, and that is evidenced by how many students simply don't know what to ask in class, right? It happens all the time. And there's those few kids who have a question and everybody else just sits and listens. And it's not because they aren't curious about things, they don't wonder about things. And it's not even because they don't have questions. They just don't even know how to filter the information enough to be able to figure out what question to ask. So our job is to help students begin to understand, one, how to ask great questions and what kinds of questions they should be asking, and also to become more aware of their own thinking and the things that they don't understand so that they can ask good questions. So students need to be aware of what they're wondering about, of what they're confused by, and what they want more information about. They need to develop a level of curiosity. They need to become aware of their own thinking. Yes, that metacognition, right? You're thinking about your thinking. And they need to learn how to really listen well so they can develop those questions. Essentially, when we teach asking questions, we're teaching our students how to think about their thinking. We are teaching them that metacognition in its very beginning stages. Now, I know that sounds daunting, especially with our younger primary grade students, but it really isn't. You really can do this, and your students can do it as well. And we need to start in those early grades, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, to begin developing these kinds of strategies for kids, because as they get older, they need to already have them in place because the work just gets harder. So they need to be ready for it and already have some basic strategies in place so that they can learn more advanced ways to use them as they get older. We have to start with listening. If your students don't know how to listen, they cannot move forward. I like to think of it like a game board. If you didn't listen, you lose a turn and you have to go back into training and listen again, right? It's like when you just tell students to do something and they turn around and ask you what it is that they're supposed to do. They didn't actually listen. They may have listened to your actual words, but it didn't go into their brain and they didn't process it. And that's what listening really is. It's not just hearing the words, it's actually processing them and deciding what you're going to do about them. So when you have students that come and ask you, what am I supposed to do right after you gave directions, teach them how to frame their question in a different way. Have them come to you and say, I'm confused, or I'm not sure about this, or I think I need to hear that again to understand it. You're teaching them to look for clarity. If you want to apply it to a text, grab a favorite text and you can help students learn to look for clarity in a text. So I might take The Relatives Came by Cynthia Ryland and take the page that says, it was hard to sleep with all that new breathing in the house. This is such a great line, so I might say to students, help me out. Does anyone have any thoughts about what that means? I'm a little confused. Students will have all kinds of ideas. If your students aren't all jumping in and having good ideas, you can pair them together and your students can ask each other and talk to each other about it. But if you're finding that students are still confused, you can give them another image and say, okay, I want you all to close your eyes and imagine 5 people sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor of your bedroom tonight. What would that sound like? And give them a minute to just imagine that. And then partner them together and have them form an answer to my question of, what does this mean? I'm confused. Then have them clarify for you. You can do this throughout this text and lots of other texts. Pick a text that you really love and you know your students will enjoy and jump on in and just try it. I tell my students that we're going to play a game where you're going to try to find things like this to wonder about. So raise your hand when you hear something that makes you curious, that makes you confused, that you wonder about, or that you just need a little more information about in order to really understand it. And that's how we play this game. It's very simple. It's just a hand raise when they're confused. And so then they get the opportunity to ask their question. And you give them a sentence frame in order to ask their question. I'm not sure about this. I think I need to hear that again to understand it. What does the author mean by that? Any kind of sentence frame that you want to give your students that you feel is appropriate to them and to their age level, that is helpful in this stage because they need to learn how to frame their question. So give them a sentence frame or two that they can choose from to be able to decide how they're going to frame their question. You'll get better questions that way. There's tons of books that are great for this. If you have very young students, try the Mo Willems books. Mo Willems uses wonderful, wonderful words, but also the pictures are important as well. And for young students, they need to look at both to be able to understand these texts. And so those are good things for students to be able to use. They can easily frame questions about things that are happening. Or try The Mitten by Jan Brett. Or The Gardener by Sarah Stewart. That's another good one. I like Lily's Big Day by Kevin Hanks as well. That's a fun book. Or even if you want something in a little different bent, you could try Stella Luna by Janelle Cannon or The Philharmonic Gets Dressed by Carla Cuskin. There's tons of great books. My point is you aren't limited to a certain book or a book list or anything like that. Just find a book you love and your students will enjoy and use that. You can ask questions about pretty much any text. Just give your students a sentence frame and get them started. Do some modeling first. It's really not difficult, but you do have to train like anything else. teach your students how to ask clarifying questions. You can do this outside of your literature time. You can do this on the playground when there's playground problems. You can do this in class discussions. You can do it when students are doing book talks. You can do it with homework and other assignments. Give your students a sentence frame so they can ask you questions about their homework and their assignments before they leave for the day. When you give directions, give them a sentence frame and then say, okay, does anyone need to clarify? Does anyone need more information to understand what it is that I'm asking you to do? Did I leave anything out? Sometimes when I give directions, I might leave out something very important inside of those directions, something that's so obvious that the students will definitely have a question about it. Maybe I'm say, okay, so you're going to go ahead and do page and then skip over that part and keep on going with the rest of the directions. And students' hands will shoot up almost immediately and say, what page are you talking about? But then you can go back and say, okay, well, let's frame that into our questioning mode. Mrs. Burns, I'm confused. What page do we need to do? And that can be their clarifying question. So these are important pieces, but sometimes we need to frame it by deliberately leaving information out so that they can learn to hear that something's missing or that they're confused. And then you can start to move into working with the text. I like doing this with playground problems and other things too, because questions are a great way to get deeper and find the information that we need. An example of this is actually recently with my daughter, who is in high school, was hearing all these things from other students. Lots of it's gossip, but there's always that kernel of truth, and you know how it is, and it becomes upsetting. So I told her to ask her friends and acquaintances these questions when they're coming to her with all this gossip and misinformation. And some of it's true, but you want to clarify and find the truth in all of the information that's coming at you, because high school's like playing telephone, right? And most playgrounds are like playing telephone. He said, she said, and the next thing you know, it sounds nothing like the original whatever anybody said. So some of the questions that I gave her are, ask them, did this happen to you or to someone else? Did you see it happen or did someone tell you about it? Is someone being harmed or could be harmed? When there's playground problems, I ask clarifying questions, and I point this out to students all the time. Is someone being harmed or could they be harmed? Does this affect you? Is this your business? I ask all kinds of clarifying questions, and you do too. We just aren't thinking about it in that way. So once we start thinking about it and we point that out to students, they can ask questions of each other on the playground as well when there's problems, when there's gossip, when whatever is going on and they're not sure about something. They need to just become aware of the fact that maybe this isn't the truth, and they can start asking clarifying questions. It can solve a lot of problems, and the students will be able to sort things out pretty darn quickly themselves and know what to dismiss and walk away from and what might need more further investigation. So let's go back to reading. So if we're going to apply this to reading, we can think about, what is this book about? What is happening? Who are the characters? Is there a problem? Where is this story taking place? What's the problem? And then we need to ask the next question, which is, how do I know that? And then we can model going back and finding the information. When we ask the right questions, then students are able to go back and say, all right, so these are the things I think are happening. And then how do I know that? So then I can go back and investigate that further in the story. You can also approach questioning as curiosity. You can model curiosity and wonder as you read. Sometimes you're reading a book and you're like, wow, why did the author say it that way? I love the way it sounds, but why that way and not just being so direct? The description, sometimes we can get involved in it and it's such a great picture, but asking questions about why they're doing that is important, not just for reading and understanding the text, but it's also important for us as students are developing into writers, so they understand, why was this effective? What is it about this that's so appealing to me? That's curiosity, that's wonder, and we want them to question in that way as well. We want students to think about their thinking. Questioning strategies are all about thinking about our thinking, right? So asking students to find one thing that they wonder about, set them up by reading a page and stopping there before moving on in a book so that they can think about what's going on and what they think will happen next, but they can start questioning what has happened so far. So stopping long enough to say, okay, what do I know so far? Those are good questioning strategies. It isn't necessarily about just fact finding. Questions can be about so much more than that. Questions can be about checking in on our thinking and figuring out, do I understand what I've read? What is going on? What does that mean? These are all things that every student can start to learn to ask themselves. It doesn't mean they're going to do them all at the same time and they're going to do them all the time, but at some point we have to start with these strategies, teach one, get them good at it, then move on and teach another. You can sprinkle them throughout the year. You don't have to teach all questioning strategies all at once. Give them one or two, give them some sentence frames, and have them practice. Use ones that will be practical both inside of the lessons and in your regular classroom and playground as well. This gives students maximum exposure to practicing, which we know sets them up for success. Another way for students to question is when other students are presenting in any way. Another way for students to question is if you're watching a short video clip or you have other students or a speaker come in. These are ways we have to learn to question as well. We have to question what we're hearing from other people. We have to question what we're seeing when we watch a video. So giving students some strategies to be able to ask questions about these kinds of things is important. So imagine you're having a book talk, a student's giving a book talk. What else do you still wonder about? Is there anything else you'd like to know about this book? Why don't you ask Angelique about what it is that she really loved about this book? Maybe students need to know a couple more things before they decide if it's a book that they want to read. Well, those are good questions. Ask those kinds of questions. Set your students up for success with all kinds of questions and examples the first few times that they're doing it. And after that, I think you'll be amazed by the questions they'll come up with. They will come up with their own that are even better than things that we could dream up. Now remember, when you teach students to ask good questions, that means they're going to start really asking good questions all the time. Be prepared to answer them. Yes, it's going to affect your lessons. It's going to affect everything that you do, but hopefully that's a good thing because they'll be asking questions in math. Hopefully they'll be asking questions in science and social studies. They'll be wondering and they'll be more curious. And that's our goal, isn't it? All right, so a quick recap. Teach your students to listen. I will do another podcast episode just on listening, and that will be coming up. But in the meantime, teach your students critical listening. Teach them how to listen, stop, think about what they just heard, and then decide if they have any questions, and then get them a chance to listen a little bit more. It helps it like if you have a recording or a video that you're watching, you can do the stop and start very quickly and easily. So that can help. You can do it when you're reading a picture book. You can stop and start with a picture book as well. These are ways that students can learn to listen better, and you can train them in how to listen better. You're giving them a framework and you're giving them opportunities to stop and process and think in between, because some students need longer to process than others, and some students have questions every second of every hour of every day. Model wondering and being curious when you're teaching. You can do that in any subject. It works especially well when you're reading a book to students. You can wonder and stop and be curious and model these strategies as well. Play the questions game. We're going to play a game where you're going to try and find things to wonder about, and students are going to raise their hands when they have a question and something that they found that they need more information about. And they can question the questioner as well. So they can ask clarifying questions after someone else has asked a question. So someone might ask a question, maybe they get an answer, and then they can come up with even more clarifying questions from there. But don't forget, as your students are learning to ask good questions, giving them frames for asking questions is really important. Come up with a frame or two every time you're asking students to focus on asking questions. Whenever we're requesting that they're asking questions and they're developing good questions, you must give them some sort of framework for doing that. If we don't, our questions will not be as good and as thoughtful as they will be if you've given students that frame. And I do have an asking questions cheat sheet for you. And that and any other resources mentioned in this episode will be in the show notes on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for all those of you who've taken the time to post a review or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in this episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. Also, you can continue the conversation online with me in my Facebook group, the Teach Joyfully podcast community, where elementary teachers can connect, get help, and encouragement for all kinds of education and parenting topics. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.